Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Mercedes Garcia Perez. I'm the head of Global Issues and Innovation at the EU delegation to the United States. It is my great honor and pleasure to be your moderator of this first part of our event today on energy efficient buildings for a sustainable future in the context of a transatlantic conversation. Books have been written about how buildings can contribute to our happiness. Today, we will be discussing how buildings are also important to our health, to the health of our communities, and the health of our planet. You will hear about buildings that can behave like forests and buildings that are independent from the grid. You will hear about projects that serve communities with affordable energy and housing by putting people at the center of how we build, and about how all of this can be fostered through the right policies, both in the EU and the US. Let me bring you briefly through the journey that we're taking today together. We'll first have a panel with the vision from our keynote speakers. Then we will move to a policy session when you'll hear from the policy practitioners what are the policies that the European Union, the US, and of course with a focus in California, and are really taking forward together, and I'll be your host for these two first sessions. Then I'll hand over to Bronwyn Barry, who will lead the discussion with the doers on how we make this happen, with the architects and the experts on building decarbonization. And finally, we will close the conversation with a third panel with what I call the healers, on what they do to build back better, to ensure equitable energy efficiency is at the center of how we build. And that panel will be moderated by Carmelita Miller. So you probably joined this discussion today because you're interested in buildings, in nature, in energy, in architecture, and in equity, and the relation between all of them. We hope that you will leave this discussion inspired and that you will participate fully into the discussion with your questions and comments. For that, ahead of the first panel, let me just give you a few housekeeping tips. To ask panelists a question, please look at the bottom of your screen where you will find a menu bar. You can submit your questions to the questions and answers bar in the chat function. And feel free to submit your questions anytime, already now. We'll get as many as possible, and we'll try to reply to as many as possible of them. And one last note about how the event will be broadcast. It is in the US, in the EU Facebook page and our YouTube channel, and it will be recorded and also offered for greater viewership after we conclude our discussion today. We want this to be the start of a conversation. We want to build a community around this very important topic across the Atlantic. And the ambassador will make an important announcement on how we want to build that community together with all of you today. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the ambassador of the European Union to the United States, Stavros Lambrinidis.
Thank you, Mercedes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to the California Energy Commission, to the Embassy of Belgium, to the Consul General of Denmark in Silicon Valley, and the Danish Energy Agency for joining with the European Union to host this event. Now, I am honored to open this transatlantic dialogue on energy efficient buildings alongside Lieutenant Governor Kunalakis and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Speaks Backman. Dear friends, the EU and the US have a long record of positive cooperation in energy and climate. And a huge part of that cooperation is with the state of California. Since last spring, the EU and the US have each evolved pandemic recovery strategies that feature climate change mitigation through the development of cleaner and more energy efficient industries. We will use this strategy to build back better, to create millions of new good jobs, to boost research and innovation, to foster the health and well-being of our citizens, and yes, to save the planet. At the federal level, under the EU-US Energy Council, we are forging ahead with engagements and working groups on energy policy, energy technology, and energy security. And we are talking much more with each other about what we call just transition, about leaving no one behind. Because it is going to be costly and it is going to affect many communities as we transition to a carbon-free future. But, no matter what we do at the federal level, as we all know, the real burden of action falls on local actors, the states and cities in the United States, the member states and cities in the EU, and of course, the private sector. These entities are the drivers of change. Through them, and with California's leadership, the US was always in Paris. European Green Deal and Fit for 55, as we call it, well, that's our side of the Atlantic. And that's where the European Green Deal is the absolute priority of this Commission and of our 27 member states. By 2050, we aim to become the first climate neutral continent, and we have put that into law. We have bound ourselves to that goal. The European Green Deal and the COVID recovery plan for Europe prioritize energy efficiency as a key means of the clean energy transition to achieve the 2050 decarbonization objective. We have a massive new fund of almost $1 trillion to support the structural reform of our economies as we build after COVID. Close to 40% of that fund will be invested by EU member states in the green transition. And that's only a part of what we will be investing, what we are already investing in the European economy of the 21st century. We are putting our money where our mouth is, delivering innovation and a competitive edge while ensuring security and resilience of energy supply and health benefits. We are also drafting our laws to match where our mouth is. A new package of a dozen or so legislative proposals includes, among other things, an amendment of the Energy Efficiency Directive to implement the ambition of the new 2030 50-50 55% emissions reduction target, and a revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Why are we doing this? It's huge. Buildings use about 40% of global energy, 25% of global water, 40% of global resources, and they emit approximately 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, buildings offer the greatest potential for achieving significant greenhouse emissions reductions at the least cost in developed and developing countries. And furthermore, energy consumption in buildings can be reduced by 30 to 80% using proven and commercially available technologies. The idea is that in addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, stimulating building renovation can open up far-reaching social, environmental, and economic benefits. It can create new jobs. It can strengthen industrial competitiveness, and it can alleviate energy poverty. Now, this is important because buildings, as Mercedes said, are our homes, the places where we work, where we study, where we play, where we live. If our built environment is healthier and more efficient, we will also be healthier ourselves. People should be able to see, feel, and experience the advantages of greener transition and do so through greener architecture. So, like the historic Bauhaus movement that started in Germany and developed here in the US through the universities where the Bauhaus exiles found a place to thrive, the new European Bauhaus is intended to be more than a school of architecture. It is intended to connect the worlds of sustainability, of culture, of the environment, and yes, of art. In addition, it is also crucially important from an economic and social perspective, the just transition that I mentioned before, as investing in buildings can inject a much needed stimulus into the construction sector and the macroeconomy. Now, keep in mind, renovation works are labor intensive, and they can create jobs and investments rooted in often local supply chains. They can generate demand for highly energy efficient equipment. They can increase climate resilience, and they can bring long-term value to properties. These are tangible economic benefits on the ground and local benefits. Now, dear friends, to achieve the at least 55% emissions reduction target by 2030, the EU must reduce buildings' greenhouse gas emissions by 60%, their energy consumption by 14%, and the energy consumed by heating and cooling by 18%. With the right incentives in place, EU building energy demand by 2030 could be a quarter lower than it was in 2005. But this is a titanic task. And as you will hear, we're not there yet. We are not there yet. Therefore, the EU is setting policies to encourage the uptake of energy efficiency measures in products and buildings. This is where our Renovation Wave strategy comes in. Don't you love the words we use? We have a wonderful name for every strategy. Usually no one understands the names. This one perhaps people can. It was announced last fall. Its objective is to at least double the annual energy renovation rate of residential and non-residential buildings by 2030 and to foster deep energy retrofits. Mobilizing forces at all levels towards this goal will result in 35 million building units renovated and 160,000 additional green jobs by 2030. My EU colleague, Gaspar will speak more about the Renovation Wave strategy later today. And let me take this opportunity as well to make an important announcement, as Mercedes said. We are soon launching 6 transatlantic dialogues on energy efficiency and decarbonization of buildings, and we invite you all to join. These 6 webinars will target policy innovations, successes, lessons learned to stimulate the massive investment and deployment needed, particularly in underrepresented regions, to reach Paris Agreement ambitions. They will be held under the strategic implementation of the Paris Agreement program, and we will share its invitation with attendees here as soon as it is available. Now, we hope that many states will join us in this effort. We know California will. In the EU, dear friends, we have taken note that President Biden's American Jobs Plan calls for $213 billion to build, preserve, or retrofit more than 2 million affordable and sustainable places to live. And the series of building energy efficiency announcements from the Biden-Harris administration at last week's Better Building Summit strongly supports that plan. California's leadership in building energy efficiency is truly inspiring beyond all that. Since the oil crisis of the 1970s, up to the announcement this month of a new draft building code that prioritizes decarbonization of household appliances, California has made broad, long-term commitments to stay in the lead in terms of energy efficiency. So, frankly, it is my hope that today's conversations will not stop here, but evolve and feed into policies and action on the ground on both sides of the Atlantic. Together, dear friends, we can deliver a cleaner and more prosperous future. This is not pie in the sky. This is real. It is happening. And the more we unite, Americans and Europeans, the faster it will happen, and the more effective it will be. Now, I am proud to introduce my friend and frankly compatriot in heritage, the esteemed Lieutenant Governor of California, Eleni Kunalakis. Goodbye from me.
Greetings from sunny California. I'm California Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kunalakis. Today's conference brings together an incredible list of speakers from California, the European Union, and from the federal government in Washington, D.C. All of us, I'm sure, will learn a great deal from the decision makers and technical experts participating in today's discussions. I also wanted to send my best to my good friend, Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis. The last time Stavros and I saw each other, we were virtually celebrating the United States' re-entry into the Paris Agreement. The United States' return to the Paris Agreement is just one example of many that underscores how transformative our new presidential administration has been. Under the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris, the U.S. is prioritizing the fight against climate change and placing it where it belongs, on the top of the international agenda. The Biden-Harris administration has given us all a renewed sense of unity and optimism in this global fight against climate change. As an official from California who was elected during the last presidential administration, it feels great to once again be working in harmony and unison on climate issues, not only here at home, but also with our friends and neighbors around the world. Together, as we begin to emerge from the devastation of the COVID-19 crisis, I am reminded of the human ingenuity and spirit of cooperation that enables all of us to overcome adversity. Over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic, like climate change, has impacted us all and brought to light the many inequities that exist within our communities, within our regions, and within the world. Before the pandemic took hold, California was facing a massive housing crisis. And since COVID, the average cost of housing has increased 16% in our state, only exacerbating the issue of housing affordability. In the recent months, California has taken quick action to address the housing emergency and enable people to stay in their homes. But the ongoing housing crisis must be addressed. As we work to transition to clean energy and achieve decarbonization across industry sectors, addressing the way we build and how we live is paramount. In California, residential and commercial buildings are responsible for roughly 25% of California's greenhouse gas emissions. Decarbonizing our buildings will require continued support for energy efficiency and greater investments in a carbon-free energy grid. The buildings of the future will be highly efficient and emit fewer greenhouse gas emissions. They will also be connected and responsive to the needs of the grid. As we focus efforts to decarbonize buildings, we must do so in a way that accelerates social equity, builds economic security, uplifts local communities, and supports positive health impacts. We will not achieve sustainability without widespread access to clean energy, and we must enable access to high-quality, energy-efficient, affordable housing if we are to realize a just and equitable transition. Governor Newsom recently stated that when this pandemic ends, we will not be going back to normal because normal was not good enough. Our journey back must also be a path forward to close those inequities. A truly just, clean energy transition leaves no one behind. Now it is time to take bold action. And in California, this means we must work together. We must approach the housing crisis not just from the state level, but also from a regional level. We must listen to communities and work in tandem toward viable solutions. We must take a holistic, multi-pronged approach to how we build with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice at the forefront of our policies and actions. Together, working with communities, local leaders, and our friends and colleagues around the world, we can ensure that equity and sustainability remain integrated threads woven throughout every piece of global economic recovery plans and at the forefront of our shared energy and climate goals. As we move onward and upward in the transition to a low-carbon future, let's do so in a just and equitable manner, and let's do it together. Thank you.
Thank you. And after the inspiring words of Ambassador Lambrinidis and Lieutenant Governor Kunalakis, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Kelly Speaks-Bachman. Thank you for joining us today, Kelly. Let me just briefly introduce you. You're the the Acting Assistant Secretary for Energy, Renewables, and Energy Efficiency. You run an office that has a 2.8 billion portfolio to spend in this important task through the deployment and research and innovation of the technologies that allow for this deep transformation. And you bring to this important responsibility 20 years of working in energy and environmental issues. We're delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to be here among you as a partner in combating the climate crisis. I want to thank you for your commitment to joining in conversation and collaboration with peer governments and non-governmental organizations. I'm really excited to work with all of you to learn from each other share best practices, and ensure our mutual goal of an energy efficient future comes to fruition. Together, I believe we can kickstart this clean energy transformation and build a more inclusive and equitable society and clean energy workforce. President Biden did take sweeping steps in his first 100 days to really build a new American infrastructure and a clean energy economy that will create millions of new jobs. We now have more climate goals than we can count, and together they constitute the most ambitious and expansive climate plan that our nation has ever seen. The Department of Energy has such a tremendous opportunity and a responsibility, frankly, to the American people to establish viable pathways that will help us to realize President Biden's vision. Our mission is to put the United States on an irreversible path to build a 100% clean energy economy no later than 2050, and also to ensure that this transition is one that benefits all Americans. The president often describes the Department of Energy as the tip of the spear to put his climate plans into action. And in the office that I lead, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, or EERE, as I call it, it's our mission to drive the research, the development, the demonstration, and the deployment of innovative technologies, systems, and practices that will get us there. We conduct research and analysis to establish viable pathways to achieve this 100% clean energy economy no later than 2050. And we've identified 5 programmatic priorities to get there. They include decarbonizing the power sector, decarbonizing transportation, decarbonizing energy-intense industry, reducing the carbon footprint of buildings, and decarbonizing the agricultural sector. And today, I'd like to really focus specifically on that objective to decarbonize our buildings and the actions that DOE is uniquely positioned to undertake to remake the building sector. Buildings represent, as you heard earlier, a tremendous opportunity as we address the growing urgency of this climate crisis. Right now, our nation's residential and commercial buildings use about 40% of the nation's energy and account for more than 35% of US carbon emissions. And despite this, we know that buildings waste about 1/3 of the energy that they consume, while we in the United States really spend hundreds of billions of dollars in US dollars each year to heat and cool and light and otherwise power them. Our path to net zero carbon economy runs straight through our buildings, which means we need to help more than 123 million households and 5.9 million commercial buildings across the US to reduce their emissions and convert to cheaper, cleaner energy. We're starting on an aggressive whole building approach to reduce the operational carbon footprint of the US buildings. And these advances are going to be made while maintaining or improving affordability, comfort, and performance. We will accomplish this through three paths. One, by decarbonizing the power grid, which in turn decarbonizes the electricity that serves these buildings. 2, by electrifying a significant share of building end uses that currently use fossil fuels, like space heating and water heating. And 3rd, by significantly improving the efficiency of buildings and equipment, including the heating and lighting systems, as well as the entire building envelope. And I have to say, we're not wasting any time. Recently, at the White House, U.S. Energy Secretary Granholm announced sweeping new actions to modernize and electrify our buildings, to invest in America's workforce, and to drive innovations of the future. A new national $10 million initiative for better energy, emissions, and equity, or E3 initiative, focuses on advancing the research, development, and national deployment of clean heating and cooling systems, especially heat pumps, in residential and commercial buildings. The first ever national roadmap for grid interactive efficient buildings that charts a path to triple the energy efficiency and demand flexibility of US buildings within the next decade was announced. And a $30 million investment to enhance the readiness of the workforce, which constructs, retrofits, and electrifies our nation's buildings, was also announced. Through our Advanced Building Construction Initiative, DOE is looking not just at how buildings use the energy, but how quickly and cheaply they can be made and renovated, frankly, with the best energy saving and sustainably sourced technologies and materials that we can find. But progress isn't intended to only benefit Americans. And this is so important as to why we're here today. DOE is really bringing its innovations and lessons back to the international table. where we can learn from Belgium and other EU nations by engaging in bilateral work and with the International Energy Agency. We're taking lessons learned from the Netherlands and those that are being pioneered in New York State by NYSERDA, for example, to really apply a whole building retrofit approach to the US market. So in closing, we have a lot of work to do to meet this Biden administration decarbonization goal, and we cannot do it alone. We need your collegiality and your expertise to really make sure that the United States is using its resources in a way that aligns with peer governments and non-governmental organizations, as well as with industry and utilities and end users. We believe that really together we will accelerate the progress that's critical to securing our clean energy future. So I hope I've left you today with some encouraging indicators of the scale and the speed at which our nations will face this climate crisis by transforming the way our buildings use energy. And this, I can promise you, is only the start. We're really thrilled to be able to collaborate with the global community once again to make this happen. And we really look forward to nurturing this enduring partnership with you for many years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for that glimpse of the promising future that opens up when the EU and the US cooperate together in this important undertaking. Let me now introduce our first panelist from our next panel. As I said before, we now hear from the policy practice, and our first speaker there is David Nebo. David is the Building Technologies Office Director of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and will bring us into more detail about the plans that have just been outlined by Kelly. David has an important international experience as he was the Director General of the Department of Energy, Utilities and Sustainability of New South Wales in Australia. It's Australia's most populous region, and has served in a number of environmental and governmental advisory committees in the past. So David, the floor is yours. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Mercedes, for that introduction, and thank you, Ambassador Lambrinidis, for your comments, and of course, Lieutenant Governor Kunalakis of the great state of California. And I'm joined on this panel by my close colleague, Andrew McAllister, who is a commissioner on the California Energy Commission and one of the leaders in the U.S., and then my boss, Acting Assistant Secretary Kelly Speaks-Bachman. So I'm going to go through some slides, but they're going to be very familiar. I'll tell you why, because next time I'm just going to hire Ambassador Lambrinidis and Assistant Secretary Speaks-Bachman to do my slides, because they did a great job presenting the facts and the issues before us. And so I'm just you'll have to indulge me for a minute to say the same thing they just said. So again, I hope we all know on this call, if not, you do now on this meeting, rather, the big role that buildings play. And these are U.S. numbers, about 40% of energy use. I'm going to focus a bit today on electricity use, where buildings are 3/4 of energy use, and even more at times of peak demand, a little over 1/3 of CO2 emissions. And as you just heard from Assistant Secretary Speaks-Bachman, a utility bill in the U.S. measured in the $400 billion US annually, over 1/3 of which is wasted. So that's well over $100 billion US that does not provide any heat or cooling or lighting of any productivity. And so we were working towards that goal in my office. BTO is the office I direct, Building Technologies Office, inside the Department of Energy. So you just heard a discussion of decarbonization, in particular of buildings, and I'm going to focus on a couple of these, but I just want to lay out 4 of them for perhaps for the future discussions, perhaps for those future dialogues between the U.S. and the EU that Ambassador Lambrinidis said would be happening. So the 4 buckets, you just heard this from the Assistant Secretary, and I put them in a slightly different order. There's no rhythm to the order here. Energy efficiency, the traditional way to do more with less. And in buildings, we have many opportunities to do that, of course. Demand flexibility. So this means to not only use less energy and fewer kilowatt hours, but to give buildings the power and the ability to use them more flexibly, especially across time. And because of the advent and the revolution in the past few years of connectivity, microprocessors, and other technology, we can use building technologies more flexibly without any reduction in comfort or service. Next is one that's emerging. We are only beginning to work on it at the U.S. Department of Energy, and I know European colleagues are too. That is the embodied carbon and energy that's in the building construction themselves, that's inside the steel and the glass, even the solar panels and the equipment. And how do we manage that? Not just deal with the operational energy, and finally cleaning up the power grid. So for buildings, a lot of that means electrification, but it also means a cleaner power grid, as well as buildings being able to use potentially clean hydrogen. So these different opportunities need to all work together to face our climate crisis. I see in the chat room that I can't be heard. Can somebody confirm that you can hear me? Okay. Next is, I'm just going to do a quick run through what we do at the Department of Energy. I don't expect you to read all this, but it overlaps significantly with what other members of the EU are doing and the EU as a whole is doing. One, very centrally, are appliance regulatory standards, minimum performance standards for appliances, equipment, lighting. In the US, we regulate more than 60 products, from refrigerators, dishwashers, and lighting, and all sorts of equipment. This represents about 90% of residential energy use, and comparable and a large share of commercial as well as industrial. We work in 3 areas there: test procedures, developing fair test procedures, working with the Energy Star program. Next, we actually promulgate regulations that are mandatory. And third, we work to ensure compliance by manufacturers and importers of that equipment. This is enormously impactful by any measure you want: dollars, kilowatt hours, grid reliability, and of course, CO2 and other emissions. Next, I want to talk briefly about building energy codes. Here's one area where I have to say with some competitive shame, I think the U.S. as a whole, we do this. First, I should say the U.S. generally building codes are adopted at the state level, sometimes at the municipality level, but like other federal governments, such as Canada and Australia, it's not done at the national level. But I was going to say I'm a little I admire what the EU has done on building energy codes in recent years, and certainly what the state of California has done. At the US, among our states, they make these decisions at the state level, and at USDA, we provide support for them. We provide technical assistance. We work with the bodies that develop model codes that the states may choose to adopt, to strengthen, or sometimes to dilute. And we're also looking, and again, working closely with our colleagues at the IEA and the EU at where should building codes go in the future, including existing buildings using building performance standards. How do we integrate potentially photovoltaics and electric vehicle charging into building energy codes, and what's the role of resilience? And I want to focus now, I'm going to save zero energy code. So if you look at this chart, these are the 2 US-based model energy codes that are adopted, and then, as I say, states may choose or localities may use them. The green is our residential code, the IECC. The yellow is our commercial, the ASHRAE 90.1. And you can see the progress they've made over the years. In fact, I need to update the slide because the green line now has a 2021 entry that just was released a few weeks ago. That's a 9.5% improvement over previous years. So downwards is good here. So look, this is a bit of a Rorschach test here, right? If you want to say, look at the progress that model energy codes have made, and with it, the adoption of codes, you'd be right. If you want to say, look how much is left to go, you would certainly be right. And to meet those tests, to get down to zero net energy, you can see that there. That would be an important, exciting, and as we just heard from other speakers, an essential step that needs to be taken. There's still plenty of work left to go. And we will, at the DOE, we're working with the code bodies and state and locals and others, and would welcome the opportunity to work with the EU, of course, and the state of California. I hope Commissioner McAllister will talk about zero energy codes today. I'm going to talk about two cross-cutting activities at DOE that I think are essential for the future of climate change and building control. One is what we call grid interactive efficient buildings. If you want to call it buildings to grid, that's fine. It's the same thing. What we're doing is using grid interactivity. First, I just want to say we start with the occupant. You have to, in any demand side measure, energy efficiency measure, no matter what our climate and resilience and affordability and workforce goals are, we will not succeed if occupants are not comfortable and productive and saving money. So we start there. And then we think about the technologies we can use to help them out. Many of these are traditional energy efficiency technologies, insulation, efficient windows, LED lighting, but many of them now can be grid interactive. We can use, you see the little icon for the microprocessor on top. We can use microprocessors that can take signals from the power grid, that the power grid perhaps is stressed. Because like today in Washington, D.C. at 3 p.m., it's going to be 34 degrees Celsius. And that our power systems can get stressed by all the air conditioners kicking in, perhaps for the first time this summer. Well, that can send a signal that it's time to ease up on some other uses, such as water heating, thereby better balancing the grid. Or you see those little icons for sensors, so that lighting controls. Right now, your office, if you remember your office, has an occupancy sensor. It's simple. Occupied, not occupied. Well, modern sensors can say what the population is. So for an open space like an airport lounge, the sensors will know, are there 4 people in there, in which case it can save on air conditioning, or are there 400, in which case it's time to use more air conditioning. And again, aligning it with the signals from the grid, which could be price signals, could be physical signals. This work on grid interactivity gives buildings enormous potential demand flexibility and helps them integrate variable renewables. You heard Kelly talk about our Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, announced just last week this new national roadmap for grid interactive efficient buildings. I commend it to you. You can just Google it or go to our homepage or the Berkeley Lab homepage. It's it's 150 pages, but only 40 of it is the real meat. So I really commend it to you. It does 2 things. It analyzes how big the resource base is, and we have determined that over the next 2 decades, there's $100 to $200 billion US in opportunity, and it provides 14 recommendations that are summarized on the right side of the slide towards our aspirational goal of tripling efficiency and demand flexibility. I'd love to get your input. I think some of those 14 recommendations are relevant to the EU. Some may not be, and I certainly welcome your recommendations that we should be thinking about in the US. Finally, I want to talk about advanced building construction, and in the interest of time, I will just say, look at that photo in the middle. That's from the Netherlands. That's Energy Sprong. These are new technologies that we need in construction. On the left there is a modular a building construction where the parts of the building are panelized or modularized or built in factories and then brought to site. These approaches can help with existing buildings or new construction by using modern technologies, 3D printing, advanced materials, digitalization, robotics, things that our colleagues in manufacturing take for granted. For God's sake, it's 2021, but in construction, we're still not seeing enough of it. We're hard at work on that, and I have to mention workforce development. The modern workforce needs modern skills, full stop. That's true in Europe, it's true in the US, it's true in Asia, it's true in Africa, it's true in Oceania. Our workforces in the building and construction field need to keep pace with the technologies that are needed to avert the global climate crisis, or at least to moderate it. Thank you, merci. It is very good to be part of this. Again, I thank the EU and our friends in California for organizing it, and US DOE looks forward to continuing to work with you on our shared mission.
Thank you, David, and we'll read that code with interest, and we'll get back to you on what our experts think about it. Let me now introduce one of those experts, my dear colleague Gaspar, who joins us from Brussels, and he is the team leader of the National Long-Term Building Renovation Strategies within the energy efficiency unit of DG Energy. So Gaspar is in charge of making the renovation wave happen in practice and making sure that energy efficiency in buildings is fully embedded into our plans for economic recovery. So Gaspar, the floor is yours to tell us how we do this on the other side of the Atlantic.
Thanks a lot, Mercedes, for your kind words. It's of course a great honor to be able to speak in front of you today, and after such distinguished speakers. I'll be extremely happy to present in the slides what the European Commission, what the European Union is doing to implement the renovation wave, but also to really learn from colleagues and friends in the United States and in California. As Ambassador Lambrinidis was saying in its introductory remarks, clearly buildings are playing a central role in the European Union strategy for fighting against climate change, and it's a key pillar of the Green Deal that President Ursula von der Leyen is pushing forward. We, of course, consider buildings as an essential element in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of fighting against climate change. But what the COVID-19 crisis also learned, as taught us, is that buildings are also a focal point of our daily life. It has been our office for those of us teleworking, classroom for children. So the renovation wave is not just about increasing energy efficiency in buildings. It's also investing into a new way of living. It's also a way to inject a very needed stimulus into the construction sector and the macroeconomy. As Ambassador Lambrinidis was saying, we have a lot of work in front of us in Europe. The numbers are that today only 1% of the buildings undergo energy efficient renovation every year. So which is really not sufficient if we want to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Something which is specific maybe to Europe is that many of our buildings have been built in the 20th century before the 50s. We also have a lot of buildings dating back from the 19th century. And so we say that roughly 75% of the building stock that we have in Europe is energy inefficient, with between 85 and 95% of today's buildings that will still be in use in 2050. So the challenge is really important. We think that for reaching our objective, we will need to renovate almost 35 million buildings. But this comes, of course, with a great opportunity for creating jobs in the green sector, in renewables, in insulation, in all the supply chain for building renovation. So ourselves a simple objective in our renovation wave strategy that we adopted in October 2020. The main objective is to double renovation rates in Europe in the next 10 years, so by 2030. But we also want to avoid that these new renovations will be only light bulb changes, if you want. We want to make sure that renovation are going to be in-depth renovation, but also encompassing renovations, looking at the different elements together in a strategic way. And just to give you an example, I'll come back to that later on, but we are working a lot on integrating the renovation of buildings into the recovery plans that member states are providing to the Commission for the moment. We are analyzing these plans, and we make sure that the measures for energy efficiency in buildings bring at least 30% of energy efficiency gains to make sure that we go for medium to depth to deep renovation in that context. So the challenge is huge, and we need to go step by step and to focus on a number of priority areas. In the Renovation Wave, we have selected these focal points. The first one is the decarbonization of heating and cooling. For us, this is essential for integrating more renewables into the building sector, to increase the electrification of our buildings, and to ensure that there is a dialogue between energy efficiency and the deployment of renewables. Of course, a number of technologies will be essential in that respect, notably heat pumps, but we are also looking at district heating and decarbonized gas. A second very important point for us is to make sure that the Renovation Wave is not just about reducing CO2 emission, it's also about tackling energy poverty, and therefore to look at the worst performing buildings as a priority. The idea is to reduce emissions, but also to reduce the energy bills of low income households in Europe, and to really have a strategy that will leave no one behind in that journey. The third priority area is public buildings and social infrastructure. Our hospitals have been really at the center of the attention and of our efforts during the COVID crisis. We think that energy efficiency in hospitals and schools, notably, really deserve to put a lot of grants, financial instruments, and expertise to boost the Renovation Wave. We also think that public buildings can play a key role for public authorities to show and to show the example, to show the way. And that's the reason why we are working closely with national states, but also with regions and municipalities, with the Covenant of Mayors, to really make sure that the Renovation Wave is being implemented at all governance level. Finally, I would really like to insist on the fact that for us, it will be essential to have funding tools combined with technical assistance instruments. Our experience is that even if we have money on the ground through institutional banks or through commercial banks, it's difficult for companies and for households to make the decision to go for in-depth energy efficiency renovation, because they don't really understand what it means in terms of planning, in terms of funding. So we really think we need to bring the technical assistance together with the funding in a joint offer, so that they can take the right decision and go ahead. I was really interested by what David was saying on building codes. This is also something we are indeed looking at very carefully at the Commission at the EU level. And as you know, we are looking at a number of legislative revision for accompanying the Green Deal and the Renovation Wave. One of the pieces of legislation we are revising is the Energy Performance of Building Directive, and in that context, we are contemplating, we are analyzing for the moment, notably in the impact assessment, the possibility to have a phased introduction of mandatory minimum energy performance standards for existing buildings. We have energy performance certificates for 20 years in the EU, but the idea would be to go one step further and to introduce progressively minimum energy performance standards. And we are looking at the different options and the different consequences of such a move. We want also to update the rules for energy performance certificates, and we are looking at possible extension of buildings renovation requirements also for public sector buildings. All that, again, will not be possible without accessible and well-targeted funding. And there, of course, we have, in a sense, a great opportunity with the recovery facility that has been established for tackling the consequences of the COVID crisis in Europe. As Ambassador Lambrinidis was saying, this is of an unprecedented scale in terms of funding. And what we see for the moment is that all member states that have proposed their national recovery plans, took an important part of the funding for energy efficiency in buildings, for renovating their building stock. Different strategies at national level, different systems, but all the member states are really putting a significant part of the money that is available for boosting energy renovation. And this is, of course, on top of regional funds that are offered at EU level for member states and for region to work on energy efficient renovation. What we want to do is to make sure that we simplify the rules for funding streams, but we know that grants will not be enough for tackling the challenge we have ahead of us, and therefore we are working a lot with institutional banks, with the European Investment Bank, notably with the European Investment Fund, but also at national level and with the commercial and the private sector to create and develop financial instruments that provide beneficial conditions for households to be able to invest in the renovation of their home. So we want to increase the capacity to prepare and implement renovation projects. Skills will be essential in that regard. I was also listening to David with great interest in that regard. But what we know is that we will also need to improve the supply chain for construction products and services. We don't want the renovation wave to end up with, a wave of waste coming from demolition. We want to make sure that we integrate sustainable materials and nature-based solution into the picture, that we work on legislation on marketing of construction products, and that we really integrate material reuse and recycling into the renovation wave concept. I will not be much longer. I just want to insist on two last points. For us, the renovation wave is a great opportunity to help people improve their buildings, their home at an individual level, but it's also a great opportunity to unite people and communities. So to develop a neighborhood-based approach, notably through district heating, but also through renewable and digital solution to create zero energy districts where consumers become producers of energy, so that they can sell producing home to the grid. And we want to make sure also that we are working at this district level on energy poverty and an affordability of housing. We will boost an affordable housing initiative for 100 districts to exemplify, to show that we can renovate buildings while creating this community approach at EU level. Finally, as Ambassador Lambrinidis was saying, this is not just about digitalization, about technology, about energy efficiency. We think, in the US and in Europe, buildings and home play a very important societal role. It's part of our identity. So we want to make sure that the renovation wave is not destroying the aesthetics, the cultural dimension of our buildings. And that's the reason why President Ursula von der Leyen launched this new European Bauhaus initiative, where we want to bring together architects, practitioners, legislators, regulators together, really to create this renovation wave that bring together all the different elements that are important for buildings. I will stop there, but I just want to warmly thank you for the opportunity to exchange with you. We have, of course, a lot to learn from you, from the United States, from California, and we are eager to develop that dialogue for boosting renovation and fight against climate change. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Gaspar. And it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Commissioner McAllister. Andrew McAllister is the California Energy Commissioner. It's been a pleasure to cooperate with your colleagues to prepare for this event. And we are delighted to have you today. You've on your second term at the California Energy Commission, and you have also managed the California Center for Sustainable Energy before that, and you have significant international experience in Central America and Southeast Asia and Africa, not only on energy renewables, but also on the industrial side of things, on load management and other areas. So a real pleasure to have you today, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mercedes. It's really a pleasure to be here. I know a lot of work has gone into putting this together, and so kudos to everyone involved. And I particularly want to thank Ambassador Lambrinidis and Lieutenant Governor Kunalakis, as well as Assistant Secretary Speaks-Bachmann. Really great to have their leadership and presence here to really, I think, highlight the gravitas of not only this event, but also the climate crisis that we are really in the midst of. And I think we can't lose sight of that. There's tremendous urgency. My slides, I'm going to dwell on just a few slides and perhaps make up a little time, but I wanted to highlight just a few points at first. There really are three goals overall that we have for decarbonizing our entire economy by 2045 in California. That includes, obviously, our energy sector, and we're particularly focused on the electricity grid, making great progress there. But overall, there really are three primary goals. Decarbonization, which we're all focused on. Reliability cannot suffer. The energy systems have to be reliable. So whatever we do has to enhance reliability. And as David and others have already said, there are plenty of ways we can do that with our buildings. They can actually be part of the solution. We will be electrifying tremendously, both transportation and buildings and industry, all of the above, to the extent we possibly can. And so as that load grows and we are forced to make new investments in the grid, there's an immense opportunity to optimize those investments with smart development in our buildings, both our new construction and our existing buildings. And so that context, I think, is important because our buildings really are part of the solution. We have some big tools that we use in California. David highlighted a couple of them. I think Gaspar echoed those in the European context. I was actually in Brussels and visited the headquarters of the EU while they were working on the objective, and it was really, I think, it was very interesting for me to get an insider's view of how that has developed and been promulgated across the member countries. It's very different than the U.S., but I think it's commendable in terms of its breadth and really its vision. So we have a few big tools. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. The building code is one. I'm going to dwell on that because we're in the middle of updating the California building code, and it's going to be transformational in terms of pivoting toward electric technologies, particularly highly efficient electric technologies like heat pumps, which will have a huge carbon reduction impact. And load flexibility, I always also want to highlight because we're doing a bunch of things in that realm. I've posted here a couple of documents. Perhaps those can be posted wherever they need to be for full access. But one is a building decarbonization assessment that we've just come out with that the California Energy Commission has just published. It's in draft form. And it's looking at how we get our entire building sector to 40% below 1990 levels of emission by 2030. And the very strong takeaway is no matter how you slice it, even if we have a lot of success decarbonizing the gas side, we have to electrify. Those are the pathways that get us to the scale that we need. We need to piggyback on the cleanliness of the electric grid, which will be zero carbon. We're making great progress and are confident that will happen by 2045, if not much sooner. The second report I want to highlight is also a draft report, but it's highly developed on load management standards. The Energy Commission has 3 standards-making authorities that affect buildings. One is our building code, which I'll talk about. 2 is our appliance efficiency standards, which complement those of the federal government that David discussed. And the third is our load management standards, which really focuses on, now in the digital age in 2021, load flexibility and automated to the extent possible, trying to push that into the marketplace, take advantage of time-based rates in the electric sector to really enable a huge, broad ecosystem to scale quickly and cheaply to everyone inclusively, to be able to utilize our buildings, as I'm saying, as part of the solution. So with that, I'm going to just zip through a few slides. There are too many slides here, so I'm going to just focus on a few of them. So we have shifted towards a zero emissions buildings focus. We really have focused on energy, and all kilowatt hours and therms now are not created equal. So really, it's all about the emissions. And in the building code and other contexts across all the agencies in California, we're shifting towards carbon metrics. About half of our energy is electricity at the end use, and half is natural gas. So obviously, the electricity will shrink in terms of emissions, and the gas side really needs to get with the program and decarbonize even the smaller system that'll be left. So this is just the whole California Independent System Operator system. You can see the trend is downward. The monthly emissions decline, but you can see seasonal differences, which are very important for grid management. This is the carbon content of our grid. So the green obviously is clean, the red is not so clean. And you can see that when the sun's not shining, the grid gets more heavily carbon. And so we need long duration storage and short duration storage and everything in between to be able to manage that energy so that our electric sector really can sort of spread that green all over every hour of the year. California already has quite an energy efficient economy. We've been flat on a per capita basis for the last 40 plus years. And now that's happened, actually, you can see at the United States, across the United States as a whole, and even per capita energy consumption electricity consumption has begun to decline somewhat. We need to keep that trend. Energy efficiency, obviously key for all that. So here, these are all the things we have going on to address greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. And I won't highlight every single one. I already highlighted the load management standards, and many of the other activities here. In the last week, just as an illustration of how active building decarbonization is, since Friday, actually, yesterday and last Friday, we have had very substantive workshops on building decarbonization. One to introduce the 3232 report to the world, and then the second one in the context of our biennial integrated energy policy report, which is in development this year, which I'm leading. And building decarbonization is one of the 4 key themes in that statewide energy policy document. So highest priority is building decarbonization. So building codes, I'm just going to talk for a minute about this. We have unique authority, I think, across the states around building codes. We don't adopt the IECC code. We develop our own. We have for decades. And it really gives us some flexibility. Obviously, there are federal kind of constraints about what we can do as a state. But we have relative liberty to push the envelope on energy efficiency as much as we possibly can. It's a building energy efficiency standard. And so the beauty of that approach is that inherently efficient technologies like heat pumps do very well. So we can ratchet down the energy budget for new construction and large additions and alterations. We can really ratchet down that energy budget such that only the most efficient technologies can really compete, will help each construction project comply with the code. And so in this code update, we're tilting the playing field very steeply toward heat pumps. In the residential sector, heating for water and space account for about 80% of the emissions in California. We have pervasive natural gas distribution, and so those emissions need to be addressed. And so heat pumps are the way to do that. We can get to 80% reductions right off the bat through electrification of those two heating loads. So in the 2022 code, we're sort of building on what we did in 2019, which we required solar for residential construction for the first time, I think, globally. And that is in place. And now we're adding some energy performance measures, and including the electrification ones that I talked about. We're also requiring batteries and PV and solar for some non-residential building types, and that's really to emphasize the importance of load flexibility. Batteries really help those buildings manage, and they can reduce costs for the occupant, but they can also help the grid, and so they just have tremendous value. So we're building that into our building code. Heat pump transition, I talked about this. I think I won't repeat what others have said. Market development is still needed for heat pumps, both in the existing sectors that they play in and also in larger applications like large boiler replacement with heat pumps. That technology really needs some low-cost solutions. But we're working on that with our R&D efforts as well. Lots of components to the heat pump transition. In existing buildings particularly, we have to do better, I think, in terms of starting. And I'll just say most of our programs at this point are being conceived as starting with low income, focusing on disadvantaged communities and places where the marketplace absolutely is not going to get the job done. And if we can succeed there, and then we can scale to all the other parts of the economy. But the equity piece of this really is an organizing principle in California at this point. We're also, and this is the last point I'll make on the building code, we're also, where builders insist on putting in gas appliances, they have to do a bunch of other things to meet that energy budget. And so they'll have to really amp up the energy efficiency, building shell, whatever other components the building has, better windows, better construction practices, et cetera, in order to meet the energy budget. So at the same time, if they insist on putting in gas appliances, then they have to also prepare those for an electric future. And so at the cooktop, at the HVAC system, at the water heater, there have to be the 240 volt circuits. The panel has to be sized to be able to adapt to electricity when that replacement happens 10, 15, et cetera, years down the road. I already talked about this. I'm going to just, this will be my last major point here. So load flexibility. David made this point very well, and kudos to DOE for their GEB, their grid interactive efficient buildings. I think that is a landmark report for the nation. We in California, we sort of, at the state level, we do the nuts and bolts. So we have a half a dozen different activities, all working complementarily to address load flexibility. And that's from the grid planning with the independent system operator, demand response type programs, all the way down to requiring at each individual device native load flexibility capacity, so that's having the controls and the communications to be able to respond to grid needs with an automated signal. We will be building that in over the coming years to as many device categories that is appropriate, so that we have those resources available, so that this load flex can be a resource, a time responsive resource that is callable and is predictable and is accountable, just like any other resource. So I think that's really the future. We can do it. We have the technology. We're in the digital age. It's time has come, and our load management standards in particular give us the authority to do quite a bit. We also have a law that was passed a couple of years ago that we're implementing to do this requiring of native load flexibility in our appliances. That's Senate Bill 49. Very exciting. It's a unique authority in the country, and so we're going to move the market. And I talked about load flexibility. I just talked about all this. I'll just mention that research and development activities, the Energy Commission spends about $160 or so million per year on research and development, all about energy, most of it about electricity. We just funded a $16 million project to establish the California Flexible Load Flexibility Hub. So Load Flexibility Research Hub. So CalFlex Hub, we call it. So that's an effort that'll last for at least 4 years. It's just getting off the ground. Very exciting to help develop these solutions. And then finally, I'll just say data. I've been pushing data ever since I sat down in 2012 at the Energy Commission, and we're making a lot of progress. This is one example of a benchmarking tool for our commercial and large multifamily buildings. You can go online and slice and dice the data that you want. There's a lot of ways this is going to help us move towards mandatory, for example, performance standards when we can characterize and target those appropriately. Well, data is essential for doing that. And we have pervasive advanced metering across the state. So customer level data, large data, AI is now we're now bringing that into the electricity sector, the energy sector. So that's very exciting. The Energy Commission is leading a lot of, I think, really cutting edge initiatives in that realm. You know, this is a big data and AI as part of the rest of the economy, you know, most of the sectors of the economy. Well, it's time for the monopolists to kind of come along and join that innovative front, because it's key to getting the job done. And as I say, keeping costs down optimally so that everybody can share in the benefits of the clean energy transition. You know, in addition to the jobs and the participation in the installation and all of the work that's needed to benefit from the clean electric and the clean energy systems that we know everyone will have to pay for. So we need to optimize the cost as well. So I believe that is key takeaways. I think you know, existing buildings are a huge challenge, but we're making progress on the technologies that we need, and implementation and funding, really, and public-private partnerships. Really, we have to find ways to solidify those to get the job done. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention, and looking forward to some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McAllister. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move to the next panel, which is led by Bronwyn Barry, the founder of North American Passive House Network. We'll hear from you and your colleagues how we get from policy to action. And I hope your panel will be as inspiring as mine, which has yielded a lot of ideas on how we can collectively make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. Well, I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the North American Passive House Network. This is a great segue from the policymakers section, because this panel will focus specifically on implementation. We have a diverse group of practitioners who will be sharing their ideas and also their experience of actually getting the job done. These are pioneers really working right on the cutting edge of where we need to go. So I'm really looking forward to seeing their inspiring examples. So the panel will start with Alexander Koningshaug, who is based in Copenhagen. He works for a company called 3XN, and specifically in the think tank division called GXN. So Alexander, welcome, and I'm going to hand it straight over to you in the interest of time to keep this panel moving.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your attention and invitation to this panel. My name is Alexander Kongshaug, and I'm based here in Copenhagen, as Bronwyn just mentioned. And I brought today two different projects, which you will see here. The two projects have in common that they will be addressing the whole CO2 savings and how to do it in a more practical design. So what you can see here is that's a lovely picture of me presenting 3XN GXN. We are sitting here in Copenhagen, where we are divided into these 4 different sectors. So I'm presenting the whole research department, which is called GXN, where we focus a lot on circular economy digital design and behavior. So how does behavior shapes architecture? Vice versa, how does architecture shapes behavior? So our most important factor is that we like to implement our knowledge and research into practical solutions. So today you'll see two different projects. The first one I'm going to start out with is the resource blocks, which takes place here in Denmark. So the resource block started out a couple of years ago, where the government handed out these three different reports, where they're trying to address three very different things. So this is non-political in terms of our statement. We're just trying to react on reports and research based on the government. So by reacting to some of the problematics that can be with parallel societies, by reacting on the goals of bringing down CO2 by 60% by 2030, and also by bringing in different circular solutions in terms of mapping sustainable building methods by 2021. So bringing these three focus points together, we wanted to react on the whole list of parallel societies and the way that they wanted to address these areas. So the government came up with this proposal of how they could create greater diversity in these areas by bringing down the whole building volumes by 1,300,000 square meters, and then addressing new diverse typologies with 700,000 square meters. So by doing this, it was super important for us to be circular about it. So the picture you will see here to the left is how we do it today, and the picture you see to the right is our proposal of how we could do it. That we actually go into these volumes, these building types, and then cut it down bit by bit, and recycling every single material which comes out of this building volume. So on site, we suggested that we could transform these different building blocks into new typologies that would not only create sort of like a knowledge sharing and different ideas of how we could do it, but also create different kind of diverse typologies on site. So here you can see some of the concrete modules being transformed one to one into wall elements, and you can follow the whole story by these modules. So another project I brought is called Green Solution House, which is being built as we speak. Is taking place on the island of Bornholm, the sunniest island in Denmark. And here we focused a lot on building in wood, building in CLT, also known as cross-laminated timber. So we wanted to build a carbon negative hotel extension, and then we looked into the whole tectonics behind these panels here. So the design, which you can see to the right, also mimicked these tectonics and allowed us to sort of have this rhythm of these CLT panels going and dividing of this building structure here. So we took use of the whole manufacturing precision, where you see these CNC cutters cutting out the elements, where you can actually reach a very high level of detail, but with a really low cost, and create these bespoke designs. And here we were addressing all the offcuts, which you can see laying here in one of the hotel rooms, and then transforming them on site to bespoke furniture designs for the hotel. And you can see some of the natural ventilation solutions, which were also able to be done by these digital fabrication methods, as you can see. So in GXN, we focus a lot on that we had to learn from our buildings. So we added a lot of sensors detecting moisture and statics, and then creating this sort of security across all the stakeholders involved in the building. So we could follow the whole building throughout its lifetime and perspect different kind of life cycles. Because our overall goal with the structure is that by building in wood, we are embedding a lot of CO2 from the start, and then we're releasing or using CO2 throughout the lifetime of the actual CLT structures. So here you would see three different diagrams, three different graphs, where the CLT structure is a diagram of how much CO2 it uses throughout its lifetime, and then when you burn the building down or you tear it down, you release all the CO2. Where the diagram to the left, you have an example of a concrete structure where you're using all the CO2 in the start, and then throughout the lifetime you're almost using the same amount of CO2 in terms of servicing and maintenance. So what we want to do is that we want to be able to build and design for this assembly. We want to be able to actually reuse some of these panels. But the whole method of or strategy of reusing and upcycling and building for design for this assembly is not implemented in these different kind of building certifications as BREEAM, WELL, DGNB, and so on. So what we want to address is that we should extend the whole life cycle analysis and then reconfigure these certifications so we can actually extend the use and the outlet of carbon throughout these buildings here. That was the last slide for me. Yeah, once again, thank you very much, and thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward for the Q&A round.
Thank you so much, Alexander. That was fascinating, and I particularly appreciated that full life cycle assessment graph that you shared. It's a great segue into our next presenter. We have Sebastian Moreno-Vaca joining us from Brussels. Sebastian is a notable figure in the global passive house community, and his work on regenerative design, adding that same component to the operationals analysis of buildings, is something he is going to present to us today. His company is A2M, based in Belgium, but working internationally. And the project he has mentioned he's going to share with us is actually a US-designed architect building in Brussels. So an SOM building is what you shared. So Sebastian, welcome, and thank you for joining us. And please jump in, and we'll hear what you have to share today.
Okay, thank you, Brian, for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation. I don't see the slide, but I don't know if the slides are visible. Okay, yeah, now I can see. So as you heard, we are coming from Brussels, where actually passive house became the code in 2015. So we're going to show you also how do we get there in two words, and also what does it take that to be in such an environment when everyone and every production that you have in a significant renovation or new build has to fulfill these passive house buildings, which is like with energy savings about 90% on heating and 50% on cooling. So it means also that all the production that you're going to have and you had in Brussels since more than 5 years now has to follow this new code. So what we saw, and it's also a diversity, an amazing diversity of design, of look, and so on. You see here even the star architects like Jean Nouvel, or even from the north, Seth Moller, whatever it is, or Baumschlager, Nebo, but everyone has to fulfill this passive house. And we're going to show you also that in retrofit, it's also possible to go that far. So after doing that, we could arrive to such a kind of a code is because it was following a law that has been voted in 2015, actually. And the former government, when they vote the law, is because they apply a lot of incentive and grants and tax reduction to really increase the production of this beacon of demonstration project. In the meantime, that has been applied and introduced in New York. You've seen that in Philadelphia, Chicago, also in Vancouver. And it really makes me think about a famous quote from one of the CEO of the largest development and builder company. It's called BAM. And the developer said, look, you in Brussels, when you push us and you vote such a law, it was like a very big step. And we prefer to have that for once, instead of these comfortable tiny steps that we do all the time, and we see how does it lead after 5 years. You see here in the graphic, after 5 years of that strong policy, we had more than 15 million square feet passive house in the region. And you compare here to other counties or to other states, I would say, where they were applying during the same 5 years this small step policy. So after that, okay, for us it's clear, the message is clear. So in the meantime, we start spreading this kind of knowledge, how to make it simple, very sexy, very attractive, with no extra cost, of course. And how can we go beyond? Because the funny thing is, all the real estate and all the stakeholders in our market now, because it's normal, passive house, it's just normal, they want to go beyond. So what's next? What's beyond? So in the meantime, we open an office. We have now an office in New York and an office in Lisbon to continue to have this kind of very cutting edge project. And the idea is we discover very soon, very fast, that actually a passive house is not the goal. It's just one very big step. But it's only a first step. We can go where more beyond, and even beyond embodied energy and carbon neutral. So the idea was, after 2-3 years, when we did very large competition in Paris, and we are doing now a project in Arizona, I'm going to show very briefly, is the question was, instead of just try to limit your impact on the environment, can you go that far that you're going to regenerate the environment? It means if you don't do the development, if you don't do the project, it's going to be worse for the climate. It's going to be worse for the planet. So that's the idea. How can we regenerate the environment? So I'll show you here some examples of these with zero extra cost projects. Some are already built, some are in construction, even on large scale, on a district scale, that we are doing here and there in Europe. Some can be also on very high design, and it's really, we use all these tools to try to manage this design, but we reverse it. We use these tools as narrative, not only to produce an Excel file to see, oh, we are CO2 neutral or we passive house. No, it's really to produce story and narratives to live in. For example, that's an embassy we did for Belgium in Morocco, and actually it's completely off-grid, self-sufficient, it's unplugged. We delivered that embassy 2 months ago. We hope it's going to work, because otherwise we're going to have some problem with the ambassador, but we will see, because sky is the limit. Huh? And here you see the project where we are currently working, where we go to that regenerative design. We call that also permacity, or what's beyond. So the one on the left is a retrofit of an iconic building in Brussels, one of the unique projects of SOM, who has been done in the 60s. And this is a large development we are now doing in nearby Phoenix, actually in Illinois, in Arizona. So for this one, it's a retrofit of a bank. It's a bit more than 500,000 square feet. And the question was, is it possible to renovate such a big building? It's an office building, actually, but to achieve the highest standard you can. So of course, it's going to be BREEAM outstanding and well platinum as you can, but you propose the same. Why don't you do a building that's going to clean the air and regenerate environment? It's going to be CO2 neutral anyway. It integrates all these new way of working that we know all today. So we're going to open all the slab in the inside, but it's also work on the envelope, but you have to respect that SOM design. It was Gordon Bunshaft, so it's really an iconic building. But by doing so, we're going to have savings then more, close to 90% savings. So we talk about here $1 million a year savings, but we change that into CO2. And also because all the building with a special product we're going to put on that is going to really clean the air. We call that, it's a photocatalyzer actually. And cleaning the air is very important in our cities. So you see here is Belgium, you see Paris and London. So we are completely in the NOx, in the smog actually. But it's the same in the US, of course. This is where you are. You have Los Angeles, so it's the same all over the planet. But this building is going to clean as much air as if it was a forest, the size of 50% parks, gardens in green area of Sacramento. You see here the map of Sacramento. So today you have like 20% of the area of Sacramento is for green parks and so on. See, if this building was renovated in Sacramento, we would just increase that as CO2 equivalent. So this is what we mean by clean the air or regenerate the environment. And the other one, cannot go too much in detail here, but it's the full cycle. It's not only to build with circular, so it's going to be with local products. It's to put houses on the market at the same cost than the one of business as usual. It doesn't have to be extra cost, but they're going to be self-sufficient, off-grid, even in water. And you know, if you can do it in Arizona, we have more than 110 degrees Fahrenheit last year. If you can do it there, everywhere else, in the planet, it's easy. So there's also this greenscape or desertscape instead of landscape. The management of the water is very tricky, it's very complicated, but it's possible. And it's also associated with the computer. So this is how, what we say now today, okay, you just have to do it. There's no excuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's always a delight to hear you present because you make it sound so easy. I'm also very pleased to say that there are similar projects happening in the US, and this is really thanks to the work that has been done in Brussels. NYSERDA, as we heard earlier, is replicating the Brussels program. Massachusetts is doing it, as is Vancouver, and I see it really exploding across the US. Which brings us to the next panelist, Amy Agerter. Amy joins us. She's also based here in California, so it's great to have another Californian on the panel. Amy joins us from Rocky Mountain Institute, and she will be sharing the research and the developments that she has been working on with her team on implementing the Realize program, both here in California and perhaps elsewhere in the US. So Amy, if you would like to, I'll hand it over to you and tell us what you've been working on. I'm really looking forward to hearing about it.
Great, thank you. Really exciting to be here. So today I'm going to be talking to you about some technology research and development that our Realize California team has been doing with the support of the California Energy Commission through their electric program investment charge program. So we're conducting research under 3 R&D grants focusing on achieving zero carbon in multifamily buildings in California, starting with disadvantaged communities in California and affordable housing. First I'll talk about kind of who we are, what is Realize California. Realize California is a regional program of the Realize Initiative, which is an overarching program at Rocky Mountain Institute. We also have Realize programs going in Massachusetts and hopefully scaling up in some additional states later this year. But in California, our aim is really to accelerate building decarbonization by developing affordable, streamlined solutions to make buildings healthier for people and the planet. So we are inspired by Energy Sprong in the Netherlands, and Energy Sprong kind of got a little shout out earlier in this program. So our program is really focusing on how do we take what they did in the Netherlands, adapt it to our local environment, and really emulate what they did there with really being able to accelerate the retrofit rate in the Netherlands, and that is also expanding across Europe. So our theory of change for Realize California is threefold, and again, kind of inspired by Energy Sprong. The first step is to standardize the retrofit package, and so this is focusing a lot on how do we prefabricate and construct all the retrofit components off-site, so when we get on-site, it can be a quick and easy installation with minimal tenant disruption. And so we're doing a lot of work right now, a lot of modeling work and research to figure out what those technologies will look like in California. And I'll be talking about that for most of the presentation, but it's also good to note the other 2 parts of our theory of change, which are streamlining the financing, which is often a huge barrier in these types of retrofits, especially in affordable housing. So we're working with some state agencies and building owners to figure out what a better solution might be for this sector. And then finally, scaling solutions. We've heard a lot from product manufacturers that they just need committed demand to make sure that they can keep this research and development cycle moving forward. And so we'll be working with building owners to make sure we have a pipeline for those technology providers in the future. So what are the Realize California technologies? Like I said, we're inspired by Energy Sprong, so you'll see a couple of those kind of typical elements of that program here. The first of which is the prefabricated wall panel that includes high-performance windows and doors. And in California, another really important part of this is really high efficiency or very airtight buildings to protect from smoke and other pollutants, and also just maintain indoor comfort. So there's the prefabricated wall panel. Another big technology that we're developing or trying to transfer to the US is the integrated all-in-one mechanical system that includes domestic hot water, heating, cooling, ventilation, and controls for smart inverter and energy storage potentially in the future. And so that, again, these are all electric fuel switching retrofits. So we also include electric appliances And then to power the homes, we also include rooftop solar or carport solar, whatever is more convenient for the building development. So these are kind of the suite of technologies that were developed in the Netherlands, and we're trying to figure out through our R&D grants, how does this work for the California climate? So to kick off our research and development grant, we did a comprehensive study of what buildings are like in California. And there were a few key differences between the buildings that we have here in California and what the buildings are in the Netherlands, and how that dictates our product R&D. So buildings in California are mostly wood frames, they're lightweight, prone to damage, and they're also seismic zones. California has seismic zones all up and down it. And so that really dictates a different kind of, there's much less weight you can put on top of these buildings. Whereas in the Netherlands, most of these low-rise buildings are brick and masonry, so there's a lot of excess structural capacity for hanging panels on top of the buildings. The second really important thing to note about the differences in our buildings is that in California, we heat and cool our buildings, and almost always with air. Whereas in the Netherlands, most buildings are heating only, and it's radiant heating systems at that. So a little bit of different design challenge to solve here. What does that mean for our product development? We have an additional grant from the Energy Commission to look into developing these prefabricated retrofit panels. And so our research and development, based on the typology study, has really led us to a product that looks different from what they are implementing in Europe. From structural analysis, we're seeing that we can only add an additional 4 pounds per square foot to the exterior of a building without triggering a structural improvement or a seismic retrofit. So we're trying to develop this lightweight panel, knowing that there probably is a need for a heavyweight structural retrofit panel in the future, but this is just our first crack at it. And so because that panel is so lightweight, there's a little bit of a restriction on how much structure you can include in that panel. So right now, it might be difficult to include the windows and doors as they did in the Netherlands, but we are doing some additional research for a new panel type that does include some lightweight structure, and we're doing that, that structural testing of that panel prototype later this fall. So hopefully we'll be able to design a panel that's lightweight and can include the windows and doors to bring down that on-site construction time. This is just an image of what the exterior retrofit process looks like. I think most notable here, so you go from the existing building, you have to remove all of the additional kind of adornments on the building so that you can reclad that box as easily as possible and simplify the geometry. And so I think that this is another area where in California we'll have to give it a little bit more thought in terms of how we go about doing this process. And how we minimize the tenant disruption, which is the core kind of tenet of our program. In the Netherlands, the buildings were already quite a simple geometry, so this is a little bit something that we'll always have to kind of develop a mass customized way to do this, knowing that every building will have different kind of geometries, but how you simplify it could be standardized in some way. And from there, you replace the windows and walls, install a new roof, and then some exterior features. On the HVAC side, we did, so again, heating, cooling with air. We did a comprehensive study of kind of potential all-in-one technologies that we could use that are currently available in the United States. And we also did the same survey for European manufacturers. And what we found is that in the United States, there really aren't any products that meet all the criteria that we need. So we actually were able to find a Swedish manufacturer, System Air. They have their manufacturing facilities in Germany, and we're partnering with them on an additional California Energy Commission grant to bring this system to the United States, and we're demonstrating it at one of our pilot projects in Southern California. I think something that's really exciting about this partnership is not only that they are going through all of the US certification process, but they're also switching out the refrigerant in this HVAC unit to a low carbon refrigerant. Low global warming potential refrigerant. And so here you can see just kind of the design. We're having some prefabricated ductwork built from that module up into the existing ductwork. So trying to reuse as much of the existing building infrastructure as possible. And this is what the finished product looks like. Again, one of the big successes of the Energy Sprong project program was increasing the look and feel and kind of the curb appeal of the whole building. So that is what we're trying to emulate here, and you'll see kind of the box for the mechanical system and then how the new panels look on top of the building. I just want to say thank you to all of our partners. This is a real team effort, and yeah, it's been very interesting seeing how we can transfer technologies from the Netherlands to California. And I think what we've always had to keep in mind as well, the technologies themselves might be different. The overarching end goal of reducing tenant disruption being leveraging offsite construction and making the retrofit process quicker and simpler is kind of what we've always had to keep in mind, despite the differences in the building types. So yeah, with that, thank you, and on to the next.
Thank you very much, Amy. That was great. So we are going back across the Atlantic for our final presenter. Manuel Perez Romero joins us from Madrid. He works at a company called Nodo 17 and is looking specifically at the larger scale cities and in incorporating energy and materials at the sort of more macro scale. So I'm excited to learn more about your presentation. Manuel, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much, Rowan. Thank you for your introduction. I'm honored to be here today. I'm more than happy to share this panel with my colleagues. I'm going to make a presentation from a bigger scale. I'm not going to focus directly on buildings, but I'm going to focus on what is around buildings. And the title of my presentation is Energy Between Buildings. That is borrowed from this iconic book from Jan Gehl that's called Life Between Buildings, that was published in 1971. It was a kind of reaction against the modern movement and to put the public space like at the center of the project and the citizens. So I'm going to provide a different perspective, like from a bigger scale, and I'm going to focus on that cities, they should not only supply resources, but our perspectives that they should produce resources, they should provide energy and materials, and they should regenerate the environment. So in some ways, it's a kind of transition from the initial sanitation ideas that they were developed during the 19th century in the cities and at the beginning of the 20th century. And then we have moved forward to the sustainability projects. But we propose to make a step forward and to go what we call the eco-self-organized systems, where cities, they should regenerate and they should provide materials and energy. We shouldn't be just thinking that cities, they are a supplier of energy and materials, but at the same time, they should produce it and they should regenerate the environment. So I'm going to explain this approach from a case study. That is a project that we are currently developing in Bosnia-Herzegovina in a place called Klekopacha. The project is based in two ecosystems, the forest ring and the agroforestry. The agroforestry is a productive ecosystem that provides materials in the form of timber. It provides food from the crops, provides energy from the biomass, and it enhances biodiversity. And on the other hand, we have the forest ring ecosystem, and that is a carbon sink. It's the heart of the city where are the buildings, but it works like a carbon sink that it captures all the carbon that we emit, and at the same time provides energy from the biomass, and again it enhances biodiversity. So the agroforestry ecosystem provides food and livestock, and in addition provides materials in the form of timber. This timber is the one that will be used to build the structures of the buildings. And in the case of making an agroforestry, planting poplar, there's a ratio that says that if you can build around 50 square meters of poplar structures per hectare per year. So if you want to build the 882,000 square meters of buildings of the city, you're going to require around 120 hectares over 30 years of production of agroforestry. That is around, it's a little bit less than the area of the agroforestry ecosystem. And at the same time, this timber that is going to be used for the structure of the building is going to work as a carbon sink, and it's going to sequester around 1.12 carbon per square meters. And yeah, we are going to build all the buildings of the city with this type of the structures, and then as we have been talking about, this city is going to emit carbon, and that carbon is going to come from the embodied carbon and from the operational carbon. So we are going to have like the emission of carbon from the construction of the buildings and from the construction of the urbanization. And again, we're going to have the operational energy for the maintenance of and the use of the buildings and the urbanization. So in terms of like big numbers, the big numbers are saying that the operational energy of the city together with the embodied energy, the operational energy is going to be gradually divided in the different stages of the city, from the buildings that are going to be built at the beginning and the others that they will be built over the years. That means that we're going to have like a carbon footprint around 45,000 tons of carbon. That's a lot, but the good news is that we have a carbon sink, and that's great. We have the forest ring that it's planted with around 18,000 trees, different type of species, and some of them they are able to capture more carbon than others. But the balance is going to be almost negative. And over the years, what we have is that the balance between the carbon emissions and the carbon sequester is going to be negative, and the balance is going to be because our goal is in 2050, and after 2050, the good news is that the city is going to be capturing carbon, and the emissions are going to be really low, but always is going to be negative. Always the carbon emissions are going to be less than the carbon that we are going to capture with the city. This is one of the initial idea from this presentation, that cities, they should provide the materials, they should provide also energy, and they should regenerate the environment. And we are doing this by capturing the carbon from the atmosphere. In addition, of course, we also have life between buildings, like jungle, like my reference from jungle, and how is the life of the city, and how we enhance biodiversity, because it's also part of the life. We have studied the different animals, the different plants, how we can interact with them, and how the life is going to be changing over the seasons. Biodiversity is a really important factor. It's not just about to put more plants and animals together. In fact, when you have a biodiverse forest, it's going to capture more carbon than a monoculture forest. In terms of the mobility system of the city, we are prioritizing those type of mobility where you use your own energy to move. Like in the case in winter, all the skiers can go skiing to each one of the buildings, and on summer you can go biking, or of course you can go walking. And then we have a second level of a lightweight mobility system based on conveyor belts and cabin lift, and then we have like the third level, that is the circular loop, that is based on electric buses. But we're also prioritizing those mobility systems that they don't require any extra energy, only the energy that you use every day. In terms of the structure of the forest ring, apart from the different type of species, it's really important to place exactly where you have the perennial and the deciduous trees. The deciduous trees are always located on the south and west orientation, so they allow the sun rays to get inside in summer. and they block the sun rays on summer. So the forest ring is divided like in the upper layer, that is the canopy layer, and also you have the shrub layer where we enhance all this biodiversity. And we know that the city is going to be growing over the years as the trees. We have like different phases of the trees, and they are going to be capturing in different way depending on the different stages of the growth of the tree. And in the same way, we are going to synchronize the growing of the trees with the construction of the city. And finally, a simulation of how this city is going to be built over these years, and how we synchronize the construction with the growing of the trees and with the enhancing of the environment. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Manuel. I think it's a great reminder to all of us that the spaces in between buildings are just as important as the buildings themselves. And I think the Spanish do that really well with the cities. So I'm not sure if we are able to go to questions and answers today. I know, unfortunately, we're running a little bit over time today. Can the organizers just let us know if we are going to be able to have a few questions and answers? Fabulous. All right, I've been given the go-ahead. So before we open this up to Q&A, I have also been instructed to let the audience know that we are conducting a brief poll. So if you are able to participate in this poll, that would be fantastic. I believe that you should have that on your screen. And we'll let the audience answer that while we set up for Q&A. All right, just a few seconds before we get the last votes in. And all right, so thank you again to our panelists. That was really informative and inspiring. All of you are doing really exceptional work. We have had some questions from the audience, and I'm going to one particular one that's close to my heart. Audience member is asking, how do we bring the passive house design for public housing projects to scale? And I think, Sebastian, you probably are most qualified to answer this one. As it's become common practice in Europe, I think, are there any quick sort of levers that you could share with us on that question? Oh dear. All right. So, we'll reframe that then. So the next question, Jody London from Contra Costa County has asked about scaling retrofits. I think, Amy, you would be in a great position to do this. She's asking specifically affordability issues and allowing people to stay within their homes during those retrofits. Do you have any insights for what you're seeing, leading out of your research currently?
Yeah, I think one of the major goals of our program, and I think one of the great things that Energy Strong did, was allowing tenants to stay in their units during the retrofit. So that is a goal that we're driving towards. Another goal is that we want the whole facade retrofit to only take 7 days. So again, that will minimize the time that there's any disruption for the tenants, even if they don't have to move outside of their building. And then I guess in terms of affordability, I think, we're developing new technologies and bringing technologies over that aren't used really at all yet in the United States. So there is a cost premium. But I think to my slide that had like our theory of change, I guess, for Realize California, that scaled solutions part is where we're hoping that by getting committed demand, by getting building owners to commit units over the next 5 years, that will help manufacturers give manufacturers the confidence to invest in new manufacturing facilities and scaling up their production. So hopefully the costs can come down over time. I think what we've seen in the Netherlands is that in the first 5 to 6 years of their program, costs did come down about 50% on the envelope side. And then I think on the similar numbers on the HVAC side. So I think just getting that scale and the committed demand is going to be really key to that. But I think in the interim, we will need some first movers and probably incentive dollars to get it started.
Thank you, Amy. Fantastic. Thank you, well, thank you for that, Amy. So, Sebastian, I'm going to re-pitch that question from the audience. Somebody asked about how we can bring and adopt passive house design for public housing projects, which have become common practice in Europe. Are there any sort of key mechanisms that you can identify for our policymakers particularly?
Yeah, we've seen already how this has been applied in cities in the US, like as well as in Canada. And actually, it's easier in your places than in our places, because you don't have to forget that in Belgium, people are not especially green. They don't, they hate change. Real estate and builders hate and architects hate to change. So how is it possible? It's just you have to attract people by giving them something. So in Europe, we had to give them money, but in the US, it's easier. You just give them tax reduction, or there is a lot of tips or tricks who exist already, and you're running. But for example, what a good example is what did Robertson in Vancouver. So when they launched that kind of retrofit or where you're going to go to passive house, they said, if someone goes in to passive house for any kind of development, we're going to give you a tax and a zoning relaxation. It means you can increase maybe by 5 or 10% what you can build. So we have the developer there and say, oh my God, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for my zoning relaxation, and say, and then if you come after and say, wait, what is passive house? So you see it's very easy to excite the market, and then it is our task, builders or architects, we architects, and all together when you work in design and build, which is very easy in the US, is how to manage to don't have extra cost, or to put the money where it's worth it, like envelope, and a bit less in other things, and make it sexy also. You need good examples. So you see, it's actually in your market, it's easier than in the European market, really.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sebastian. All right, I'm going to pitch one over to Alexander, because Alexander, you've been doing some fascinating work in data mining, and I think this is particularly of interest to our tech community here in California. Can you speak to a little bit more about how you are framing value from capturing that building data, particularly from the user, the occupant behavior data you've been collecting?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we are working a lot with data here in GXN, and also just in general as architect. There's a big trend is just to covering our building volumes and our environments with these sensors. But for us, we have been working a lot with the students and universities, so try to figure out like how can we pull out actual value from this information which we gather from the sensors. And throughout the last year, we've been working quite closely with a large client from London, where we have been developing a big tower, which is going to be standing done in 2025, where we are reaching out to future tenants and then trying to reach like the best performing floor plan for these different clients and tenants. And the way that we do it is that we reach out to the current working environment, their current office, and then we provide them with sensors, and we gather as much data on their movement and on their behavior as we can, and then we reconfigure. And then we, based on that information which we gather in, we then build up the whole business ideas that we can optimize their new and future-proven office layout to be more sort of like work efficient, but also more healthy in terms of your work life and noise and social interaction and so on. So we really try to figure out where the value is and who we are creating value for. Is it us as architect? Is it the entrepreneur? Is it the tenant who is paying for the future building? Or is it the actual user? And also ask the different kind of questions of where is the what's it called, the ethic in it, which is a difficult question. But yeah, we are really trying to
Fascinating.
model.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there, Alexander. And unfortunately, I've been told by our organizers that we do have to move on. So I apologize, Manuel. I didn't get to ask a little bit more about your own fascinating work. But I'd like to thank everybody for their impressive presentation and your inspiring work. And with that, I will be handing over to the next panelist, who will be hosted by Carmelita Miller. So thank you again for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. I hope it's a morning or midday, or maybe even evening in some places. My name is Carmelita Miller. I direct the climate equity team at the Greenlining Institute, and we are based in Oakland, California. Greenlining has a long history of being grounded in community and coalition building. And we believe that community voices are fundamental as we grow our statewide and national role to hold power to account when bringing diverse stakeholders together to develop powerful long-term solutions to combat the impacts and legacy of racism and redlining. We have a specific focus on the intersection of climate and energy. And for me specifically, I've been working on buildings policy, energy efficiency, and building decarbonization to address the public health and economic harms that have resulted from our state and been a result or can be addressed by our state and nation's energy policies. We have a wonderful set of panelists today on this third panel. I'll go ahead and start with by introducing a friend of mine who's actually unable to join us today because of a family emergency. Her name is Trinity Sampath Kumar, and she leads the policy initiatives at the California Housing Partnership in California, and helps design and implement energy efficiency and solar programs that impact low-income Californians. And she does this by engaging affordable housing property owners and community-based organizations. She's unable to join us today and sends her regrets. But we have our three amazing panelists still remaining here with us. I'll start with Jacqueline Patterson. Jackie is the director of the Environmental and Climate Justice Program at NAACP. She is an advocate and fierce activist and a personal hero of mine who has worked on issues involving women's rights, health justice, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. And so really looking forward to having Jackie talk to us, to all of you, about what she's been up to in this program. Next, we have Grace Park Bradbury. She leads strategic initiatives for Block Power, a group that has been transforming older building stock in low-income areas to make them safer and healthier for communities that have been underserved for a very long time. And the transformations and these new ideas that they are doing in Block Power has been very, very interesting. And again, hope that the audience today can learn a lot from what Grace and Block Power are doing, and especially now coming into California as well. And lastly, we have Joaquin dos Santos, a project officer for the Sustainable Housing for Inclusive and Cohesive Cities and the Community Land Trust Brussels, where he's innovating on new models of ownership that enable sustainable community building, resident participation, and preservation of affordable housing. I am getting so excited just describing all of our panelists today, because we get to finally talk about our people and what a huge problem we have in front of us right now, the devastation that COVID has done in our communities. And since we only have 30 minutes, and since I know there's so much to talk about, I actually will narrow down our discussion today to 2 questions. And so for our panelists, what I'll do is I'll ask one question and go and have each one of you address it and ask a second question. The 2 questions will be, first is that, how do you envision the role of this holistic buildings policy? What is the role of buildings policy in advancing and addressing racial justice and social justice? So that's the first question. And the second question is, what is the key solution to this very, especially in the energy industry, unique problem? Using buildings as a policy and a way to provide solutions. What is a key solution to this problem? Or another way to ask is, how do we get to your vision? So those are my two questions. I'll go ahead and get started with the first one. And again, that is, what do you think is the role of buildings policies in addressing the harms of and legacy of racism, and how it's impacted our communities? I'm going to start with Jackie. Can you start us off?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, first, I would say that we need to do a audit of some way in some way of how our who built our buildings because there's unpaid debt as it relates to our buildings and who actually the enslaved labor that built so many of our buildings. So we are thinking about issuing some invoices for that. So when we talk about racism, I would definitely start there. But secondly, the challenge now that we have is the is that the when we talk about frontline communities, racialized communities, that we're more likely to be in the buildings that are least energy efficient. For example, African Americans pay the highest proportion of our income towards energy compared to other population groups, and so we need we're in the least efficient buildings, the most disaster vulnerable buildings. So we saw when we see so many of these fatalities and loss of property as well in these disasters, so much of it is due to housing stock, and our communities tend to have housing stock that is compromised, and then also African Americans and other groups as well, but I know best the studies and the data on African Americans are more likely to be in buildings that have challenges around indoor air pollution and indoor air quality, which means everything from whether it's the lead in the air or other indoor toxins, radon and so forth that are harming health and well-being, or it is when we go back to the combination of poor housing stock and indoor air quality. We also have the situation where whether it's where we're living or the schools that our communities are in, that the schools in our community, sorry, that where the ventilation issues have meant that when we have the urban heat island effect resulting from climate change, that the lack of ventilation has meant that the kids are in peril as it relates to their indoor air conditions with regard to heat from this increase in extreme weather and particularly heat in our communities. So all of these are challenges that need that need a significant investment in terms of making our buildings more where we live, work, play, worship, and do other business. But we need to have a significant investment in redesigning these buildings so that we have that they live into principles and practices of regeneration. So whether we're talking about having buildings that respond to the time of day or whether the sun is up and so forth, or we have buildings that are where we're making sure that there is ambient heating, all the different ways that we can design our buildings around biomimicry so that it actually cares for the people who are inhabitants of the buildings. Whereas right now, as you talk about racial injustice, the folks who are in the buildings that are most harmful are the people who are racialized people. And then I'll end, because I know we don't have that much time, is that in so doing, we have to make sure when we started our Centering Equity in the Sustainable Building Sector initiative, it was when we were deciding to change our headquarters, because our headquarters was in a sick building and that had all of these problems that I talked about. And we decided to make that change. As I was going through and encountering people in the building sector, I found an extreme homogeneity in terms of who was involved in the sector. It was largely white people, a lot of white men who were in this field. So whether it's the architects, the people at the building standards and all of that, there was just an extreme lack of diversity. And so that meant that the people who were designing, the people who were making decisions about the program, the people who were in the jobs in terms of the vendors who were a part of this kind of universalization of sustainable buildings, are not the frontline communities that need this engagement the most. And this is another way of we need to think about in terms of reparations, is ensuring that these economic opportunities are there for racialized people. So those are a few examples I would give. Sorry for going over. Thank you.
No, absolutely no apologies needed, Jackie. This is the time that that we have the space to talk about our community members or the people who live in the building. And so I'd love to continue to the next panelist and have this conversation. And Grace, toss it over to you, and following Jackie's talking points around how do we address harms in policies that were originally not created for our community members, for us. What are things that you're doing and Block Power is doing to help and drive innovative solutions?
Thank you, Carmelita. I was compelled by what Jackie was sharing about leading with equity. I think it's been kind of an awakening for our country in this past year, how much of our society is set up with inequity as the result and often the intent. I think when we at Block Power work to deliver electrified buildings, we are doing that with a holistic, people-centered approach. We absolutely are, from Donal, our CEO, on down, are committed to the idea of a carbon-free, resilient future. But when you lead with equity, when you lead with the communities we serve, you have to address, as Jackie mentioned, the energy burden, as some of the panelists mentioned before, affordability, health. Health is not the provenance of just the folks who have money and time to be focused on their wellness. Health is literally the purity of the air we breathe, your built environment. And so I think policy's role is an important correction to the investments we've made to reifying racism and structural racism, and acknowledging the humanity of the folks that we are serving, acknowledging the holistic needs for decarbonization and resiliency and health and affordability in the communities we serve. So Block Power is very much committed to leading with low and moderate income communities. Our strengths in New York and now here in Oakland and Los Angeles focus on that. And I think policy is it's time for an important correction and an important corrective in our conversation on policy. Thank you.
I also had been looking into Joaquin's project, and it sounds really exciting because one common thread in what Jackie and Grace have been talking about is also the voice of our people. And any project that centers being able to keep that autonomy and the participation, but also this idea of self-determination as such a powerful tool in a very, very technical world. Joaquin, how are you doing that in your project, and how in addressing the question of what do you think is the role of buildings policy in improving the lives of of our communities, how are you also uplifting that voice and idea of self-determination?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carmelita. Indeed, in our work, we believe that actually the whole process of being involved of creating the project of what's going to be your own house should be an empowerment process. And we really pretty much see actually that this is actually really central to everything we do. We try to do that in many respects at all stages of building developments by involving future residents from pretty much from the onset to the design phase, but also kind of like carrying out workshops and in a way following an empowerment thread that can lead to many avenues to the fact that perhaps some of them might become experts in terms of energy use and in terms of becoming themselves energy ambassadors that can actually kind of like themselves supporting other members of the community in making their houses better and more efficient in terms of energy, and in being able to use all the technology that is behind all this passive house and all this architecture that is coming up nowadays. So we really do believe, I think, that a building policy should really focus on seeing housing as a way to empower people, as a way of kind of like making your life conditions, not only in terms of the concrete housing of it, but in being a process really for empowerment and for self-determination that can create opportunities for the people and for the communities to live better in better conditions, and also, why not, create economic opportunities.
Thank you for that. Folks really should check out the Community Land Trust Brussels that Joaquin here is helping lead. It's a wonderful model, at least I'd love to get to know more of that, Joaquin. But I'm going to go to our second question, which I hope we can spend the rest of our discussion on, which is the solution, right? Okay, so we now agree that buildings and buildings policies, regulations, they have a role in addressing the challenges that our folks are experiencing. How do we do that? I can also start with Jackie, just continuing the same order as earlier. Apologies, Jackie, for putting you on the spot, but can you, what do you think? What should we do?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So first, we have to balance one of the challenges that we as an organization that's kind of rooted in our frontline community leadership, that is led by our frontline community leadership. We are learning every day ourselves in terms of what the best solutions are, and we consider our frontline communities to be the experts. And so one of the municipalities was doing a regulation basically around the building codes. And so one of the things that they had was this notion of putting in this requirement that a building has a certain level of reinforced masonry, because as we know, well, as many of us know, that one of the challenges that we have is as we go down the path of false solutions in terms of our energy, then we are doing more around fracking for fracked gas, basically, and as a result, we're having an increase in seismic activity, the geologists have tied. And so there's this kind of surge in policies around reinforced masonry. But then one of our community members was pushing back and saying, well, yeah, it would be great to have reinforced masonry, but if you stigmatize the places that don't have it, and again, this goes back to my comment before about housing stock, that our communities are less likely to be able to afford the substantial housing stock and upgrades that are needed. So that's all to say that it's important for us to make sure that our buildings have reinforced masonry, particularly in these places that are on earthquake fault lines, and we have to make sure that we have strong investments to make sure that happens. So So we are very much focusing on equity in building codes and making sure that we have strong building codes, as well as we're focusing on equity in climate finance to make sure that we have the right financing priorities. And again, when we talk about intersectionality, we're looking at, you know, how much money we're spending on militarism when we should be thinking about investing more in communities that are in harm's way. How much are we spending on things that we shouldn't be on subsidies for fossil fuels when it's actually resulting in the very same problems that we then have to correct for. So for us, it's ensuring that we have better policies with everything from building codes to legislation and otherwise, but that we also have the finance that matches it, and that we ensure that in so doing that we are seeking to have equity in who has access to these to the the places where we live, work, and play, being in sustainable buildings, but then also who is a part of the workforce. And so we need to make sure we have local hire provisions, disadvantaged business enterprise provisions, fair chance hiring for formerly incarcerated persons. Because again, thinking about intersections, we know that our communities are overly criminalized and overly incarcerated. When they come out, they often don't have access to jobs because of these kind of restrictions around hiring people who are formerly incarcerated. So we have to make sure that we're thinking of the whole of society. So those are a couple of the examples that I would put forward, knowing that other people have to talk. I know they'll say so much more. Thank you.
Just a couple, Jackie. I mean, I'm furiously taking notes. Jackie, y'all, has just listed a lot of very key solutions here when we're talking about communities that have been redlined. You cannot divorce the issue of finance and if we want to address economic harm that has been it's had such an impact, and at the moment has been so exacerbated by COVID. And so Jackie, you listed so many things, and I can trace all of them back to this idea of how do we get the funding, how do we get the money, how do we address the economic harm. And there are ways to do that. Otherwise, if we can't figure it out, then our folks will be left behind. And so I'm going to pass it over to Grace to maybe continue this issue of how do you finance, how do you address these questions, these challenges by finding the financial ability to do so.
I think that's a big piece of what Block Power is working to do when we work with low-income communities and building owners and frontline communities. It's the affordability of these things. There's also the real issue of electrification assumes kind of a common starting line, that our homes are all kind of in the same condition that they can absorb the energy efficiency or electrification measures. But the reality is in many of our communities, the starting line is several feet behind, right? We're talking about generations of disinvestment, deferred maintenance. You can't put solar on a roof with holes. You can't put air source heat pumps in an under-insulated home with asbestos and mold. So we do work with our building owners, our customers, in a more holistic way to address some of those overarching weatherization kind of baseline remediations to get everyone to that starting line so that they can then take advantage of the benefits of electrification. So being more holistic in terms of what we bring into our projects is part of what Block Power does. We're also very much involved in the creative financing. I heard earlier about the constellation, basically, of programs available. Stitching that all together in a comprehensive package for building owners is really key. You know, you're asking folks everyone who's working in this ecosystem is dealing with way too many programs that they can't make head or tails of. And so part of our task is to make that as clear and distilled and as absorbable for the average person, so that they can make a more informed decision and they can move forward with their projects. We really pride ourselves in our completed projects, our built projects. We've done over 1,000 projects in New York. We are finishing up our first 5 here in California. But it is about addressing all that complexity and then boiling it down into something that can deliver an electrified project that addresses the needs of the folks that live there, their health, their well-being, their energy burden, and their ability to participate and share the wealth of the clean energy economy as well.
Thanks, Grace. Joaquin, going back to the model that you're working on and how it's connected to land and ownership of land. So speaking of a huge financial issue, again, that is very, very much connected to the history of communities of color, and at least in the United States, but specifically in California and in the communities I work in. Can you talk to us about the solutions that you have and been thinking of and advancing through this land trust model, and why the sense of ownership of the land and what you do with it, and the buildings that get created and built on them. How does this tie into the challenges that you've discussed earlier and what you're hearing from our panelists?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I mean, we're very much inspired by all the history of the community land trust model in the US. And we really believe, there's a fundamental thing that we believe is obviously that land is not a commodity, it's something that should be made available for the use and interest of the community and should be managed by the community. And I think this is really something, bit of a fundamental kind of like difference from the approach of urban development in many cities and countries around the world. So we do believe that land as a way can be some sort of like a leverage to create dynamics that go way beyond just the production of housing. As you might know, in the community land trust model, the idea is to go beyond the housing, to also integrate other assets that contribute to thriving communities. And for really this fact of being able to own the land, to manage the land in common, to make things on this land, the rest of the community, as sort of like the first step towards this whole broader empowerment process of these communities that can then create their own economic activities, that can then sort of like develop their own community organizations, that can then also contribute to themselves, spreading this whole process. So for us, yes, indeed, land is very much central to what we do, and we believe it's really a centerpiece of the model, and we really think that being in ownership of the land allows us to take this very long, permanent view of using the land in the interest of the community, and kind of having it central to an empowerment process that can really support communities and the empowerment of its members.
I'm going to wrap us up. So I'm going to give each of our panelists your one kind of idea to leave our audience, because I know that this is a very short panel, and I'm hoping that this actually entices more people to reach out to you and talk about the amazing work that you're doing. But if you can leave the audience with one message, what is it? Is there anything that we missed? So quick lightning round, as always, starting with Jackie, and then Grace and Joaquin. Yeah, Jackie, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would just say that universal access to sustainable buildings, in terms that built on regenerative design, energy efficient, disaster resilient, healthy buildings is not a pie in the sky aspiration. We've seen what's possible from what we've been able to do in the context of COVID-19, what we've been able to kind of turn around and do on a dime in this context. The possibilities are endless in terms of just advancing radical imagination and shifting our investments. And so that's something I want to leave us with, that it's possible, that it's necessary, not only for the people who are in the building, but for the planet, because we have to stop with this level of energy production that we are doing that's not necessary, that's being wasted. 45% of energy at least is being wasted. So it's possible, it's necessary. We just need to get the political will to do it. We need to get money out of politics in order to make that happen. And yes, so just let's do it. We can, we should, we must.
Grace?
I'd add to that too. This is, all of our liberation is tied up in each other, right? So all of our carbon-free futures, our resilient futures is tied up with each other. And so to bring the political and policy will to explicitly redress the historical wrongs, to bring that money, Jackie, as you mentioned, will be really key in scaling this effort. Block Power is doing this hard work. We want to see many fellow walkers in this path. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
And Joaquin?
Yes, I think I need to reiterate that I really think the whole work on energy efficiency is actually a really great opportunity to get this empowerment dynamics going, because this is something really concrete that affects people's everyday lives. So it can be their energy bills, their comfort at home. So I think this is really a great entry point to get started, empowerment processes started, and to try to start redressing all the prejudice that many communities have been suffering over all the decades. So this is definitely an opportunity we can't afford to miss, and we really need to act on that.
And when I talked to Trinity briefly today, when she told me she's unable to join, I asked if there's a message I can share here, and she said she would give her time to listen to what Jackie wants to talk about and the solutions that she's advancing. So there we go, folks. You heard from our panelists. Let's talk about our people. Let's talk about solutions that directly benefit them. Let's talk about the living human beings in these buildings. And with that, I really thank everyone for having us here, our panelists, for me in this moderating role. I'm gonna go ahead and I think we don't have time for Q&A, but I'm gonna hand it over to Commissioner Andrew McAllister. Speaking of a champion for energy equity and justice in California, hand it over to Commissioner McAllister for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Carmelita. Thank you so much for that last panel. I am so inspired. I just and thank you to your panelists, Jackie, Grace, Joaquin, for really sharing, I think, a message of connectivity that really lays over the top of everything about today. That's a beautiful message, but I think also really calls out the fact that our institutional structures obfuscate inequality. And I think to Joaquin's last point there, we have a chance to invest in a way that cuts through that and really improves all people's lives. So I really value that the discussion we just were fortunate to have, or to appreciate and take in. Sustainability comes in a lot of forms, and I think it's really important that we approach it from a holistic perspective. And we've heard different angles on that today. Beyond a focus on the policies and practices and materials and sort of project nuts and bolts, there's the human element. And I think really appreciated the vital discussion again in that last panel. The energy transition will not succeed if we leave anyone behind. And that's just sort of a statement of fact, really. We won't meet our carbon reduction goals if we don't redress some of these historical inequities. And so I think that point is just worth repeating again and again. Ultimately, it's all about ensuring a healthy and prosperous future for all people, and that means all people. And Carmelita, you said that perfectly right at the end there. So I'm heartened. We can do this. Thank you, Jackie, for your final note of optimism. I totally share it. And to round out today, I just wanted to thank everyone involved. There's a lot we can build on going forward, and I'm heartened by today and really optimistic about where we can take this collaboration. I want to thank the leadership from the United States and from Europe for helping set the tone for today's discussion. And in particular, thank you to Ambassador Lambridinis, Lieutenant Governor Kunalakis, and Assistant Secretary Speaks Backman for setting the tone early. And thank you to all the presenters. I won't name them all because we are a little bit short on time, but I did want to acknowledge and thank today's moderators, Mercedes, Bronwyn, and Carmelita. And thank you to all the folks who are working hand in hand with communities, many of which are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. Again, health has a broad definition, and this is part of the solution, but really it goes more broadly. And finally, thank you to the entire team that helped pull today's discussions together, our friends at the European Union, the Embassy of Belgium, the Consulate General of Denmark in Silicon Valley, and the Danish Energy Agency. Really tremendous partners. My own staff here at the California Energy Commission and everyone working behind the scenes, thank you. It's really a privilege to work beside and alongside and with and in conjunction with all of you. Look forward to future opportunities to continue this conversation and in fact dig much deeper. We've only scratched the surface here today. Really inspired by what was shared here today, and I look forward to continuing to strive towards a truly sustainable clean energy future for all of us and for generations to come. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and until we meet again, I hope the next opportunity comes soon. So onward and upward.